And I can assure you cross connections with our next speaker, Michelle Holliday, who joins us yet again. Michelle has joined us in past conferences, so thank you for joining us again, Michelle. Michelle is the author of The Age of Thrivability, Vital Perspectives and Practices for a Better World. So she'll speak in particular about her work on regenerative agriculture with farmers, focusing on the land as teacher, source, and host. In their work together, they explore whether our relationship with soil is the key to healing our relationship with each other and with the world. So in this sense, she sees regeneration as a synonym for healing. Overarchingly, Michelle's work focuses on living systems thinking, where she applies living systems principles and flows. So I'm sure you all noted in Dr. Vandana Shiva's presentation, she talked about this notion of living systems thinking as well. So Michelle, over to you, and then we'll do a Q&A with the both of you together after that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Melanie. I have to say, I'm among the 17,000 who have downloaded that paper of yours, Melanie, and I've been following your work. And Bill, it was a real thrill to be invited to connect. It's a little bit funny. I'm not far from Melanie. I'm about 6 hours by train, and the story that I want to share takes place right around the corner from where Melanie is. We have people in common. You mentioned Kevin Deere and how you showed on the screen that he spoke at a conference in Montreal. I organized that conference and invited him to speak there. And so there are so many wonderful connections between what you've shared and what we heard from Vandana as well. So I'm excited to be able to contribute. I will share some slides as well. All right. So Bill mentioned that my work focuses on thrivability and the perspective and practice of enabling life to thrive for us as individuals, for our organizations and communities as dynamic living ecosystems, and for the biosphere. And I bring this perspective and these practices to multiple sectors around the world, including agriculture and tourism, life sciences, and more. And at the heart of this work, as each of us has shared, is this shift in worldview. And I will reiterate, I'll offer my take on that shift, that it is, there's a story that we're still guided by in most of society that tells us everything in the world operates like a machine, and that everything can be understood and controlled by breaking it down into its smallest parts. It tells us that we exist to compete and consume. It tells us that productivity and profitability are the only things that matter, and that the best ways to get to those outcomes are efficiency and scale. And we've heard, we all are seeing around us where that story is taking us. But fortunately, more of us are starting to understand what Indigenous cultures have always known, that there is a bigger story. There's another story that is more accurate, more complete, that offers more helpful guidance. And that story tells us that the world is a living ecology and even a learning ecology. So our theme today is education. And even though most of the world's educational systems today are still guided by the mechanistic story, the word education offers some clues about that expanded and more life-aligned story. The word education comes from the same root as edus, which means to evolve or develop inherent potential. And this is something that a machine isn't capable of. It doesn't happen with machines. So education is related to the state of being alive. Learning is a function of living, and living is also a function of learning. The machine story tells us that we are separate and predictable and controllable. But we know, we can see that anything that's alive is fundamentally relational and embedded inseparably in its context and responsive to continuously emerging new circumstances. And anything that's alive involves unfathomable complexity. So to be alive is to be in continual responsiveness and evolution, or in other words, to be learning. And what I'm seeing in my work in different sectors around the world is that more people are embracing this expanded and more life-aligned story, and they're shaping their work around it. So I want to give you one example. I'd like to share a story of work I've been doing with a group of farmers over the last 3 years, and they are making the transition to regenerative methods of agriculture. And you might know that conventional agriculture is guided by the mechanistic worldview, and it tells us that it's the farmer who grows the plants with their chemicals and heavy equipment. And the outcome of that worldview and that approach is degeneration, in which the soil becomes less and less fertile, and in which the ecosystem and the community become less and less viable. Regenerative approaches, on the other hand, are guided by a story that says it's the living ecology that is the soil that enables the plants to grow, that enables them to thrive. And the farmer can support that process. The farmer can participate in that living ecology. And the outcomes of that story and that approach are things like improved nutritional value of food and higher profitability for the farmer, and reduced occurrences of droughts and floods, and reversal of climate change as the regenerated soil is able to draw carbon down from the atmosphere. So the science is absolutely clear. The outcomes are vitally important. The methods are just a handful of pretty straightforward best practices. And still, the transition from degenerative approaches to regenerative is happening so slowly and so incrementally that it's almost as if it's not happening at all. And so the knee-jerk reaction is to ask, how can we educate farmers to get them to change their behavior? Surely it's just that simple. It's just about educating them. But we know that life is never really that simple. It's relational and emergent and complex. So with farming, every piece of land, every different crop, every season, every week presents special new challenges. And so it's not that simple as just applying a small set of universal best practices. And to make things even more difficult, that mechanistic worldview has stripped farming of its culture of learning and curiosity. It's convinced farmers that they have no expertise about their own land, and it's convinced them that they are dependent on the makers of those chemicals and heavy equipment to tell them what's needed. And so this transition from degenerative approaches to regenerative calls for more than just a shift in practice. It also calls for a shift in mindset and culture. And this is exactly the fullness of what this group of farmers that I've been working with has taken on. So their project started the way maybe most community-led projects start. There are a certain group of women, and I imagine you know the type. Every good community has them. I think of them as the matriarchs, but we could just as easily call them the community stewards. So you know what happens? They get together in somebody's kitchen and they talk about a need that they're noticing in the community, and they decide to do something about it, and often in a way that creates more possibilities within the community. So in this case, it was these two neighboring farmers, Kathy and Val, who got together in Val's kitchen in Erin, Ontario, really not far at all from Mullany. And what they were noticing is that there was nothing to bring together all the different farmers, the diverse types of farmers in their region, in shared learning and mutual support. And what they also noticed was that no matter what kind of farming you do, everyone is dependent on soil. So they decided to organize a gathering, and they invited a soil scientist to come and give a talk. And they saw that there was enormous interest and great energy. So they kept going. They organized more events and they gathered more people. And then as their project grew and got to the point that there were 26 farms participating, diverse farms, and a school, and a golf course, and 40 citizen scientists. These were volunteers from around the community who were trained in how to collect data and metrics about the soil health of these participating 28 sites. And as they got funding and as the project became more formalized, they started to notice that the assumptions of the mechanistic worldview had started to creep in to their project. And suddenly the project was focused almost exclusively on a small set of rigid, predetermined deliverables and metrics and best practices. And the learning and curiosity and sense of community that had been there at the beginning had sort of drifted away, and the project was losing momentum, losing impact. So it was about the time that they were noticing this trend that I started to work with them. And we developed the habit of asking, what would soil do? What would the living ecology of soil do if it were presented with these challenges, these struggles that we're facing? And this question helped us stay focused on that story, that worldview of living and learning more than the worldview of prediction and control. And it helped us recognize that what was needed most of all was to rekindle a culture of curiosity among farmers. And to do that, we would have to cultivate the soil of community, tend to the soil of community. And so from there, the project took on new life as the Ontario Common Ground Project. And it's still focused on regenerating the soil, but it also has an explicit focus on cultivating the soil of community. And in that way, seeding systems change. So we've made it clear to our partners and our funders who are completely on board that this is foundational, that tending the soil of community is foundational to the project. And that has meant reaching out to an expanded circle of community stewards. So this is the circle of people who have stepped forward in this one community to step into this practice of tending the soil of community. And now they organize events, and 50 or 60 people will come, and word spreads by itself. And there's plenty of shared learning about those best practices of working with the land. But just as important, there's a generative space in which people are supported in finding the courage and the curiosity to experiment with new ways of being in relationship with the land and with each other. And now the project and this community of Erin, Ontario, is a pilot region for a broader project in which we will seed and propagate these patterns of cultivating the soil of community across other parts of the province, and invite and support circles of stewardship in each of those communities, and bring those stewards together in a province-wide community of practice, all supported by that, what we think of as ecological thinking, and that question of what would soil do. And all of this is feeding into this outcome of hyperlocal capacity building and regenerated soil, but also regenerated community and people. So in a nutshell, this is what we've noticed about the transition to regenerative methods of agriculture. And I have a feeling that there are parallels in many sectors to this expanded understanding of how change happens. So the dominant theory of change that we have right now tells us that the core unit of change is the individual farm, and really the individual farmer who just needs to be educated about the story of science and data and metrics. And the vector of change, the way change happens, is most of all through those few universal best practices. And the way we know we're making progress towards change is to track a set of rigid, predetermined deliverables. But what we have noticed is maybe the rest of the story, that the most powerful unit of change is community, is local community together with the landscape as a learning ecology. And the broader story of how change happens is a story of human belonging to each other, to life, and to the land. And this vector of change, the most powerful way that change happens is through emergent and reciprocal learning, grounded in relationships and shared purpose, and driven by a culture of curiosity and generosity that leads to generativity, that leads to new possibilities. And finally, the way that we know we're making progress towards change is through our own experience of inspired discoverables in addition to those predetermined deliverables. So all of this isn't to say that the things on the left in the dominant theory of change are not valid, are not true, are not needed. It's to say that they're not enough and that they won't take root. They won't lead to meaningful change if they're not grounded in the soil of community. And it's to say that the things on the right need to be valued and practiced and resourced, and they need to be part of the story we tell about how change really happens. So that's my story.